Welcome to the balance sheet, where you rise above the noise and learn about the most important business issues of our age. I'm your host and fellow student, Conrad Chua. AI is promising to upend many industries and open the door for new challenges. One such area is in AI-powered wearables. But can AI help this class of devices succeed, where the likes of Google Glass failed so spectacularly years before? To talk about this, we have Bobak Tavangar, CEO and co-founder of Brilliant Labs, the makers of Frame and open sourced AI glasses. So, welcome, Bobak.
Thanks for having me, Conrad.
So, Bobak, can you tell us what is Frame and what's the core essence behind Frame?
Yeah, well, they say always better to show than tell. So maybe we'll just start with a little presentation here. So this is Frame. Frame is as light and as thin as just a pair of glasses that I'm wearing or that most of us wear every single day. It is totally open source. This is a little charging dock that powers the battery. And you can kind of see here a little bit of text in the display. It's a see-through holographic display. And Frame interfaces with a cloud-based AI agent. Ours is called Noah. And Noah, its job is to understand what a user's question might be, and then go to any range of large language models and AI services, whether that's Perplexity for AI web search, or OpenAI's models, Anthropic's models, Whisper for translation, Stable Diffusion for image generation. And it can find the right answer or generate the image you're looking for and present that back to you in front of your eyes. So the prospect of this is that it leaves you hands-free, and that this device is aligned with how you naturally perceive the world in front of you, both see it and hear it, and they're ready to answer questions based on what it sees. So this is Frame, and we've kept it totally open because we want to empower a world of developers that are really sinking their teeth into this new creative medium of generative AI to begin tinkering and exploring what's possible.
So, Barbara, what are some of the use cases for Frame?
So since we announced about 2 months ago, we've had developers coming out of the woodwork, anyone from large manufacturing, agriculture, or sort of industrial companies that are looking to train a model, usually an open source model from a company like Mistral or Llama, on their own proprietary data set, and then integrate that with Frame and deploy that across a workforce. So those could be line operators, those could be folks out in the field doing inspection and maintenance and repair, any range of industrial or sort of large scale sort of corporate use case there. And then of course there's a lot of folks on the startup side of things, AI companies building a proprietary model that they want embodied on the end user. Maybe they're serving doctors and EMTs in sort of a medical setting, or maybe they're serving teachers in the education setting, or lawyers who are pouring through reams of documentation and need a little bit of an AI co-pilot aligned with what they see to help them move quicker through their workflow. So we've seen so much. And then one of my personal favorite is there have been a number of brain machine interface companies that have also purchased Frame, pairing Frame with humans with an implant, literally pairing Frame with the human. And they're looking to experiment with some next generation interface stuff there. So it's been all manner of stuff, and so much that we could never have imagined. But that's why we keep it open source.
So, you used the word open source for quite a few times. Can you tell us what does open source mean when it comes to Frame itself?
It means a lot, and we go a little further than most companies. So in the whole stack that we do, there's hardware, there's firmware, and there's software. And we open source all of it. So, if you think about open source Android, for example, that's only sort of like an arm's reach level of open source that happens only on the pure software side, close to the operating system. If you think about open source hardware, it's typically in fringe hacker domain, but there's very little software built on top of that. You have to kind of bring your own. We have built the full stack. So we've done the AI agent, Noah, and its integration with all these rich large language model and AI services. We've done a mobile application that is cross-platform, iOS and Android. We've done firmware that sits on frame, and of course we've done the frame hardware ourselves, the electronics and the mechanical and the optics, and we have opened up all of it. So if you go to our GitHub right now, you can find mechanical design files, you can find optical design files, you can find firmware and software code. We've exposed all of it. And the whole point is we want to increase the odds that an intrepid and creative developer, no matter who they are, where in the world they live, that they can move forward at the speed of sound and begin implementing their generative AI use case on hardware that's pretty light, pretty fashionable, and won't cost an arm and a leg.
So is your end customer going to be the man or woman in the street, or is it going to be more like an industrial type of, commercial type of use case?
I think at this stage, our first customers are, you can call it folks that are going to help us build an ecosystem. So some of those are going to be very large corporates, and a number of folks in that realm have reached out. They've done bulk purchases of the device, and we're working with them to build out more bespoke use cases. Many are going to be AI companies across Silicon Valley and London and elsewhere in the world that have an incredible model or some sort of an AI tool or solution that they want to integrate with Frame to make it embodied in a user's life. But and then you've got tons of indie developers. The middle school student that wants to do something really cool and hack something together and show their friends. So it's the full spectrum, and all of it we think of as ecosystem development. So it's developers who are seeding all manner of use cases, and then the concentric circle beyond that, it's going to start reaching folks who are not necessarily technical builders, but more users of what the ecosystem builders have made.
So it's interesting to me that your idea for Frame, it's quite different from the kind of vision that you see on Meta Oculus or Apple Vision Pro. Why did you decide to go down this path versus what those guys are doing?
Yeah, when we started the company, we kind of looked at the landscape, and of course, at that time, none of these folks had launched their devices yet. But we had our ear to the ground, and we talked to a lot of folks in the supply chain as well. At that point, many of the companies that were doing head-worn displays, devices, they were thinking about them kind of like almost pseudo game consoles. They were porting console-grade graphics in front of your eyes, and the devices end up being very bulky and very expensive, and really resembling more of a VR experience. And sure enough, that's what the Apple Vision Pro is. It's a VR device. And so, I think that that's a market in and of itself. It has its own set of use cases, its own set of technical challenges and dynamics, and Apple's clearly chosen that as the beachhead for them. I would say that Meta and the Ray-Ban glasses, that's probably the closest released device to date that's similar to what we're doing. So the key difference is we are very open and sort of ecosystem focused. Meta has that all closed off. So what you do with it is really only limited to what Meta themselves have launched or allow you to do with it. Developers can't access that, neither the hardware nor the software. But the other aspect is their glasses are audio only. There's no heads-up display. There's no AR display. So it's similar to what a company like Snap has been shipping for a number of years now. They've had the Snap Spectacles. I think they're on their 4th generation. And they've been doing audio-only glasses for a while. So Meta basically shipped that, but they backward integrated it with Instagram, with their social properties. And I think they did it in a way that I think people felt was more compelling. So they're definitely the closest, but competition makes everyone better.
So, just a reminder to people, if they've got any questions, please put them in the comments field. Bobak, obviously the people, companies like Apple, Meta, they want that kind of a bit more closed kind of ecosystem because they can really determine and capture more of the value and profit. When you go open source and as open as you have, how are you building that sort of competitive moat against others?
Yeah. Well, we think about this three ways. We are unabashedly open source for three reasons. The first is the principle. We believe in this day and age with embodied AI, AI that's embodied in a pair of glasses, for example, the stakes are much higher to have technology be inspectable, to have it be modifiable, and all of the good knock-on effects in terms of principle that open source brings to the table. We think that it's a bit of an outworn model to have just a few people in a closed room make a decision for the rest of humanity in terms of what something ought to be and how it ought to live in their lives. So we're trying to flip that script. The second reason is we just think that a lot of people have some really cool ideas around generative AI, and it's so new for all of us that by being open, we enhance the incidence, we improve the incidence of sort of killer apps around generative AI. Again, whether it's a consumer app or whether it's something for doctors and lawyers and educators, by being open, you just facilitate ecosystem development, not only maximize individual profit. But the third, and this is more of the long-term strategic thinking, our bet is that the genius, the value is in the data. It's not in the model, and it's not in the hardware design. It's not in the individual lines of software or code. All of that can be copied. Today you do great code. Tomorrow you've got a competitor that does something better. Or today you've got really compelling hardware, but next month someone new launches a device that has you on your back foot. We really believe that in this day and age, hardware and software are no definitive barrier to competition. They have to be good, but they're not a definitive barrier. The times have changed. And so we look at this landscape and we say, we need to lean completely in the opposite direction. Instead of trying to hold that stuff so closely to our chest, we need to expose it. We need to open it up. That will influence how the industry, how an ecosystem develops, and how the industry thinks about this space. But more importantly, it will improve the odds that the next generation use cases for AI are built with our device on our platform, and that drives sales of our device and adoption of our platform, which means that we have access to more data. And we think that the genius is going to be in the data, that the models, foundation models being developed by companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and others, that space is becoming, and we see this in front of our eyes, it's becoming commoditized very fast. It is indeed the reason why Facebook is doing the Llama models open source, because they have an incentive to do what Google did with Android back when the iPhone launched, just to try to commoditize a certain layer of that stack to make sure that no one, whether it's OpenAI or others, has a definitive barrier over the others competing in that space. So we look at that and we see a bunch of elephants are playing there. They're very well funded, and that's becoming a rapidly commoditized space. It's all going to be about the data. And so this kind of sets us up long term to be well positioned in that regard.
You mentioned that the times have changed, and obviously the first mass wearable device was Google Glass. So how do you see Frame succeeding where Google Glass failed?
Yeah, we get asked this a lot, and when we think about Google and what they did with Glass, I was at Cambridge when they announced Glass. It was very thrilling. It was 2012. I was in London at the time. I was down from Cambridge. I was in London for some meetings or an event or something, and someone messaged me and said, "Yo, you got to check out what Google just announced. Look at what Larry Page is up to." So it was like a YouTube video, and I watched, and he parachuted out. There were skydivers, something, but it was amazing. Um, I think, I really give them kudos. They get pilloried regularly for glass sort of belly flopping, but they had the courage of their conviction. They were an early mover, and we and a lot of people in the space learned a lot from what Google did, both what they got right, but also some of the missteps. So I always try to give them sort of a tip of the hat for that. I think the device was expensive. Google Glass was either $1,800 or $1,500 when it launched, which is quite expensive. Frame, for example, is $349, so it's relatively more affordable. Glass was, in terms of the human factors in the industrial design, it was asymmetrical and kind of hard to remove and put away, like store, when the social context wasn't right to be wearing it. And so that then precipitated this negative backlash where, because it was not so convenient to wear, and maybe the people who bought it were a little too unabashed about that, they would just roll up into social situations and expect people to treat them like there was nothing different. And of course, we knew that didn't pan out. And there was that backlash and privacy concerns. And so, really, like, our take is, when you're in a social context and it's not appropriate for you wearing this, or it puts people on edge, take the device, take it off. It's not the right. It's similar to AirPods. Like, when you're with your friends in a cafe, AirPods should be in the case, and then they're in your pocket. And we think that just social etiquette protocol dictates that. And so I think that they misjudged that, and the industrial design showed. But the third, and I think this really goes to the heart of it, it was a use case challenge. I think Glass wanted to port the Android mobile experience up in front of your eye. And I think that kind of missed the mark. And from that point onward, and this is maybe a longer story, but AR has been seeking for its existential purpose. It's never really had one. I think it's always been the stuff of sci-fi that so many of us were fascinated with. And I think it's, there have been exciting concepts in sci-fi that we've been enthralled by, but it's always been seeking for purpose in our lives in the real world outside of sci-fi, and we have not found it. Our bet is that, just like the iPod dovetailed with a creative medium like music and redefined our relationship, transformed our relationship with that medium, a device like this, AR, it pairs beautifully with a creative medium like generative AI. And that by having that embodied, it will transform our relationship with this new medium as well. And indeed, it may very well transform what it is to be a human being and our capabilities acting upon this world. So that's sort of, a bit of the big vision here and where we're going. But I think Google Glass, they were an early pioneer, but they definitely showed us, I think, where some of those early missteps were, and they continued until the present day.
We've got a question from Tuhin in Kuwait. When can we have a demo?
Yeah, well, I don't know if he joined late, but this is the device. You can kind of see the display there. It's insanely hard to capture these things through a camera unless you're looking through it. Can you guys see that? You see frame?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. So when you look through it, it feels like a large iPad, like an iPad Pro, at arm's length away from your eyes. And this is a micro OLED screen in here, and it's a blank canvas. It functions like the OLED on your phone. And so just like an app developer can display a near infinite range of things in front of your eyes on a phone screen, you can similarly treat frame like a blank canvas. So if you're an app developer and you want to do some graphics, you want to do text of various sizes and colors, you want to do emoji, you want to do vectors, there's some developers in our Discord who are working on porting the game Doom over to Frame. It's a blank canvas. So Frame is totally open and ready for some of the most intrepid ideas.
Irfan has a question, and it's, what's the business model with open source?
So we sell hardware. So fundamentally, sort of our roots are hardware sales. And we've got pretty good margins, it's some 60, 70% margins, and that's at low volumes out of the gate. So for a hardware startup, it's typically unheard of, but we do pretty well there. And then a layer on top of that is AI services. So out of the box, Frame has a free tier of AI usage, and that's capped at a certain number every single month. And so as long as people stay below that number, then they never have to pay. But when they exceed that number for certain pro users, they have to start paying for Noah. And Noah, again, is the name of our AI assistant. So let's say someone is a designer and they're just using Noah to do a lot of image generation tasks in front of their eyes. So they work with products in the studio and they're looking at this, they're saying, oh, turn this blue. Oh, make a flower bloom from this. Oh, put this on a painting and show a sun setting behind it. They're just pumping the image generation. So that's going to consume tokens, and eventually they're going to hit that sort of cap. And at that point, they can pay to subscribe. So we have a little bit of margin on AI services that sits atop the underlying hardware sale. And so then our model starts to look a little like Apple, where they'll sell you an iPhone and then they'll do services on top. Apple Music, iCloud, Fitness Plus, all these services that we're familiar with. So that's more or less how we work. It's a little bit of hardware, a little bit of software.
You mentioned Google Glass, and obviously you've had experience in Apple where design is very big there. How did design play a role in developing Frame?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Yeah, at my time at Apple, I mean, designers are the work of design is held up as sacred, and I think one of the really beautiful things that I saw there, and this is something that I deeply believe, is that to be a designer is to be human. That there should not be a subcategory of humans called designers. There might be a subcategory of people who are trained with certain technical skills to execute on design, but all of us ought to be designers, whether we are engaged in crafting copy for marketing, whether we are building companies, whether we are designing schematics or writing lines of code. Whatever we do, we should be thinking about it in a human-centered way. And so Apple takes that very seriously. And this culture of design that starts with the industrial design studio, it trickles down through the entire organization. And that's part of what makes Apple so effective is everything they touch, you really feel the full force of Apple's sort of sense of taste and aesthetic, their sense of principle echoing throughout. So that left a deep impression on me. And our team, I have two co-founders, Ben and Raj. And Ben, of course, is an industrial designer, a mechanical engineer. Raj himself is a hardware engineer, which is pretty dangerous on the software side as well. Raj more so than Ben because his official training is in design. Raj considers hardware and software as an extension of the design discipline. That to consider the human experience, to consider that a device must be thin and beautiful and light, and that his work as a hardware engineer is to conform to those requirements and not the other way around. That, as simple as that sounds, it's quite revolutionary. I mean, even still in our world. And so, we definitely try to take that into our DNA as a company, as a young company, and try to approach everything from that perspective.
I have to ask you, what did the design and fashion icon will.i.am think about Frame?
Yeah, Will's awesome. He's very fashionable. He loved it. I mean, he looks great in them too. So he's wearing our H2O frames, the ones that I just showed you, were sort of semi-translucent. He looks very professorial in these, and he absolutely loved it. I'm wearing his glasses, and I don't think they look half as good on me as Frame looks on him, but that's okay. I don't think that was the point.
Yeah, and obviously you're not. You mentioned Meta Ray-Ban, but we've also seen a couple more AI-powered wearables coming on. So Humane AI and Rabbit. How do you how does Frame compare to those products?
So we know folks at both companies, and our general sense is that we are so thrilled that once again, after so long, years seemingly, there is originality again in hardware, consumer hardware. My take is that we've been through a bit of a winter in terms of originality of form factors and use cases. But I think generative AI and a new batch of companies is finally affording that for all of us. So it's great. I think we're living in some really exciting times. And seemingly every month I see a new consumer facing hardware company announced. And I know even of one or two that are not yet out of stealth that are going to be announcing some really cool stuff soon. So I think this is cause to celebrate. And we certainly think that way. We learned from them. I think they learned from us. Form factor wise, if you really get down to it, Rabbit is a handheld. And so your hand's going to be occupied and you're going to be carrying a second, for lack of a better concept, brick with you because no one is going to ditch their phone for the R1. It's just, and I don't think that, Rabbit would advocate for that at this stage either. It's just not a practical thing for most of us. So there is that. I think the Humane AI pin, reviews came out recently and I'll let them speak for themselves, but we always found that there was virtue to having the device aligned with how you see the world and having the interface aligned with how you perceive the world. I think that the projector is very novel, but I think that there's hard limits to what that can be. And I think that people have been experiencing that. But I think as a form factor, it's very interesting. It's actually, when they announced it, it reminded me of the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix and how he would carry, they called it the OS in that film, that he had a little pocket and he would put it in his pocket. And so it looked like the AI pin and it would kind of see out from his pocket and he would talk to it. And so when they announced that, I was like, oh, cool. Like I saw that in the movie. So it's all very exciting. But, we've made our bet on glasses. We think there's virtue to not only being hands-free, not only having AI aligned with how you naturally see the world and having the interface aligned with your powers of perception, but for the form factor to dovetail with hardware that most of us, like you and me, Conrad, we wake up every morning putting on our glasses and it corrects our vision. This is an existing category, not a pin, not a second brick. And so we think there's virtue to that, disrupting the $200 billion eyewear market while at the same time delivering an AI first wearable. And so that's why we placed our bets there.
Mm. We have a question from Tim. Tim asks, geographically speaking, do you view success in any specific markets as crucial for the long-term success of Brilliant Labs? Do you have any concerns regarding the adoption of wearable technology in particular markets due to cultural differences or nuances?
The short answer is we'll find out, TBD. We ship almost everywhere in the world, and we have customers from almost everywhere. So we're eager to learn from these early customers to see sort of how that pans out in terms of those cultural differences, those nuances. What we do know is that, for example, our customers in the US, they're really into being early adopters, and most of our customers are in the US. Our customers in Europe tend to be a little more conservative around questions of data privacy, understandably, but we still have a lot of, especially development and like enterprise type customers there. And our customers in Japan are just like crazy over new gadgets. So that's been really cool. But each one does have its nuances and we have to see. I do know that in Europe, in terms of the mass market adoption, we're not at that point yet where we're spending tons on ads and, trying to sprinkle this thing to the many millions or tens of millions of masses who are ready for this. But I think at that point, we'll start to bump up against some of those cultural nuances a little more. So folks in Germany, for example, might be a lot more reticent about bringing a camera-worn device into their lives. But probably in other geographies, like here in Asia where I am, people are just a lot more comfortable with having cameras omnipresent in their lives, and would kind of not bat an eyelash. So we'll start to see that a bit more when we expand the addressable market and start to reach more folks. But I think we're still early days. We're not really hitting that stuff quite yet.
I mean, this is, well, first of all, when will the first customers get hold of Frame?
May 6th. So customers have been super patient, and we're really eager to get it out to everyone. Our factories are turning Frame units out every single day, and it's going through the fulfillment and custom process, which takes a few weeks. And then we anticipate that the week of May 6th, first customers will have Frame in hand. And then over May and June and beyond, we'll be on a steady cadence of shipment.
And when you were developing Frame, how did you as a company decide now is the time to launch it? Because this is obviously a first version of a product. When do you think we just have to go?
Yeah, that's if you ask my team, you'll probably get a different answer. But you can be in development forever. There's always little things, whether it's tweaking the plastic tooling to get a little different sort of radius on an edge, or whether it's sort of tweaking the weights of the large language model that we use to interface with Noah. There's always an endless amount that we can refine. And you get to a point where you kind of have to appreciate that we have learned as much and tried as much as we're gonna try internally, and the next big leap in our own learning has to happen outside of our walls. I think this also dovetails with the virtue of being open source. There is this really great, like from our community right now, we have over 8,000 developers. And our community is super supportive in terms of wanting to get their hands on stuff and wanting to iterate, sort of take over where we left off and iterate and showcase the rest of the community what they've built and what broader capabilities they could bring to this device. We're going to learn from that. And I think we just reached a point where we all felt that. Again, you ask my team, maybe they have a different answer, but there was this sort of sense that we've been working on this for 2 years, and the next great stage of our learning has to come beyond our walls.
I mean, that must take a collective sense of courage to just get out of stealth mode or unveil this product. But Bobak, I guess you probably personally always have that kind of reserve of courage because you have to go up against huge companies like Meta or Apple. How do you find that courage within you to start a company like Frame in this sort of market?
Yeah, I think about it in existential terms. This is just on a pure personal basis. I was at Apple previously before I started Brilliant Labs. And when the idea hit me, I was talking to my wife about it, and our son was young at the time, and so there was a lot of family considerations. I kind of thought about it like if the best companies, or at least the best founders, I should say, are those that are so compelled and so overcome by the idea and by what the world will look like, that vision of the future, if this idea is successful. And you have to be kind of deluded to think that way. But I think the best founders are. And I think that if you're so overcome in that right way, that you're crazy enough to start a company to do it, I think the question is not, what is the risk if I do this? It really is more, if I don't do this, would I look back on my life on the day that I die, whenever that day is, and none of us knows, But on the day that I die, that I look back on this moment of decision and regret not doing this. And that was certainly the case for me, and I think it's the case for many founders, that you get to that point where you get to that existential first principle consideration, and you just know it becomes painfully obvious. If I don't do this, I will regret this for the rest of my life. And so, without, for better or worse, thinking too much about it beyond that, you take that first step, and everything else follows. So, yeah, I didn't think too much about, man, what if this big company, or what if that big company? I thought it more about, existential terms, and just this sort of gut sense, like there's this opportunity and the world will look really different. Now, I will say, intellectually, I did think about the landscape, and I was observing the AR space for a number of years, even when I was running previous startups. And I saw that whether it was mighty companies like, Google or Apple, or whether it was other startup, pseudo startup companies like Magic Leap and others, they had spent billions of dollars. Like, just take Magic Leap. They'd spent billions of dollars and had an army of some of the most talented engineers on the planet, and they'd not been able to solve this problem. And so when I saw that, I got excited, because I said, okay, this is great. This means it's not a problem that money and an army of people can solve. Like, those aren't the key ingredients. It takes different thinking. It takes a differentiated approach, and maybe something that people hadn't thought of yet. So that excited me, and that's what gave me ultimately the conviction to put that one foot in front of the other and start the company.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. When you went to invest potential investors, what did they feel about Brilliant Labs and, say, the future of AR?
Most investors typically don't like to invest in consumer hardware. They don't like to invest in hardware, much less consumer hardware. They love software, where I can pull an all-nighter, write a few lines of code, and at near zero marginal cost, get it in the hands of billions of people worldwide. They love that. The economics around that, investors love it. Their LPs love it. So we are not a venture capitalist's most exciting investment. A lot of VCs, the feedback that we got in those early days was, this is very exciting. Love how you're thinking about it. I can't wait to be a customer. Let me know when the device is ready, and I'd love to buy one. But when it came to pulling the trigger on, writing us a check, it was a hard slog. And that's not unique. Every startup, no startup, unless you are, someone who's had just a tremendous exit. I'm trying to think. Palmer Luckey, for example, has sold Oculus and started his next company, and he's got many millions of dollars waiting for him from any VC up and down Sand Hill Road. So unless you're someone like that, and most of us aren't, it's a slog. But certainly consumer hardware was not, and especially this space. When we started raising venture capital, people looked at this and said, like, no one's been able to crack this. Magic Leap raised billions and weren't able to do it. Why do you think you're going to be successful? Why should I bet on your sort of harebrained, contrarian idea around this? Where's the proof point there? Which itself is kind of circular logic, but that's venture capital. And what about Apple? There was the constant question that dogged us. And we got this both from investors as well as suppliers. What about Apple? And we talked to companies in China that we wanted to work with on a supply chain level. Hey, what if we do this? And our demands are always very high. The challenging thing about being very design led is that nothing in this device is off the shelf. Everything is a slog to get a factory to make, bespoke and deeply integrated with other elements of the whole system. And so, when factories want to put in effort, they want to see, well, is there a market around this such that this company can ramp volume, such that it bodes well for us economically, because factories do well when there's volume. And most of them will look at it and say, like, well, all these other companies struggled. our own Chinese champions are not in this space because they're waiting for Apple to get into it. And Apple has not yet launched a device in the space. And so we got a lot of no's from factories even, let alone investors. So, and then of course COVID hit. So it was years of a hard slog. But you find those visionary investors. Most of our early investors were those who had built and sold companies before. So like the founder of Siri, the founder of Oculus, the founder of Pebble, and a bunch of others. The founder of Niantic, maker of Pokemon Go. All these folks are investors, and a bunch of others. Twitch, founders of Twitch, and so they got it. I think they saw it. They had the courage of their own conviction to make a bet, and I think they'd been founders before. And so we learned that the investors that are at least in the early days, the investors that are going to be most aligned are those that have operator experience and they've built companies before, especially hardware or sort of hardware adjacent companies. It wasn't going to be the pure, did an MBA, worked at an investment bank, did a year or two of private equity, and now I'm a VC. Those investors don't typically have the breadth of sort of life experience to be able to make the courageous bet in a company like ours. So we learned that early on and learned to be a little more sort of picky and choosy. But it's a slog.
Yeah. Since we're in a business school, does this mean that you feel that actually just having that kind of pure MBA experience is not going to make one a successful VC?
I mean, this is a whole conversation. I mean, the short answer is I'm one person with one opinion, and so take that with a grain of salt, right? Take it for what it is. I think just as times have changed, like I was saying earlier, in terms of open source and the relationship that a platform has to have with developers, I think times have changed for VC as well, and you don't need to take my word for it on this. If you look at the business model around being a VC, most funds fail after a couple of years. They can't raise a follow-up fund. They can't return to their LPs what they pitch, and so it's like there's a long tail of most funds that fail, and I think most of those are filled with pure theoretical MBAs, investment bankers, private equity folks. There are a few funds that do extraordinarily well, and Andreessen Horowitz and a few others, they tend to be staffed, at least at the GP level. Forget about the associates. The GPs tend to be entrepreneurs, ex-entrepreneurs themselves. And it's those funds that tend to think really differently, not just about the companies they invest in and what to look for, but also how to support the founders and how to craft their fund, craft their company around being a different kind of animal that supports founders in the most effective way. And I think that, Andreessen Horowitz is just a phenomenal example of this. Sequoia Capital is another. They really understand the kinds of value that they can add to an entrepreneur's journey beyond the capital. Most funds don't, because they don't know what it is to be an entrepreneur. And so there's like a gulf there. And so that's why the long tail of VCs don't make it. And so I say the data bears it out that, being a pure theoretical MBA or banker, it doesn't pan out. But in terms of my personal experience, like you can tell very quickly when you have a conversation with an investor and they've been in the trenches. It's like when you talk to like someone with really hard-won life experience, you can kind of feel it. And there's sort of an authenticity born of that experience and oftentimes pain. And then you can tell someone who's like in their 20s and heard other people talk about the trials and tribulations of life and have just gotten very good at regurgitating that. And you can tell the difference. So, so that's a long-winded way of saying, I think the data is beginning to bear out the answer to that question.
Well, thank you so much, Bobak, for giving us that insight into your vision for AI wearables, for Frame, but also for that entrepreneur's journey. And obviously, we wish you from Cambridge all the best as your entrepreneurial journey keeps going and developing. And good luck for the, well, obviously you're launching, but good luck as the first customers get hold of Frame.
Thank you so much, Conrad.
Yeah. So the balance sheet will be back next week, 3rd of May, at the same time. We will look at how companies decide whether to pay dividends or do a stock buyback. So till then, stay well, stay safe, and see you next time.